Good evening, everyone. Doing a quick recording because Lucas isn't available, and I'm actually super busy these days. But wanted to give a quick little talk about what's about to happen in the Middle East with Israel and Hamas. And the reason we're doing this as a solo thing for me is because Lucas wanted me to bring color to the history of how we got here, which is kind of really super important. I know a lot of people are like, oh, Hamas is so super evil. And no, they're not good. They are not a good organization. But how Hamas came to be and how we got here is really important to understand because, a lot of people are saying, well, the Israelis are going to go into Gaza and they're going to crush Hamas. No, they aren't. They aren't. They can do all sorts of horrible things to Hamas. It will not end Hamas. Because we're not dealing with the reality of why there is a Hamas. How did we get here? When we don't deal with that, we can't solve the root problem. So we need to go back to the beginning. So even before the declaration of the State of Israel, there were Jewish organizations in what was then a British colony. It was called a mandate. It's a colony. It's easier to understand, of Palestine. Most of the Jews who were living in the area had no problem. They had lived there for centuries, and they'd been able to thrive there for centuries. But you had a lot of new, especially European Jews, moving into Palestine, and they were coming with a different idea. This idea that they were coming with was called Zionism. Now, before people start flailing their hands about, listen, I don't have a problem inherently with Zionism. And for those of you who don't know what Zionism is, Zionism is the belief that Jews will not be saved. God will not come. The Messiah promised to the Jews will not come, etc. You can look at it from a secular perspective or a religious perspective, one or the other, or both. From a religious perspective, it's that we need to be in Israel for the Messiah to come. For the secular perspective, it is that there is no other place on earth that is suitable for Jews to live in except for the ancient and ancestral kingdom of Israel. Actually, technically Judah, but we won't go into that. They like the name Israel better. Israel is what we're going to get. So you have these groups coming in, and they very much have this idea that this is ours. Palestine belongs to the Jews. There's a lot of reasons why they want to come at it this way, which is, Jews in Europe had been chased from place to place. They'd been driven out of Spain. They'd been persecuted by every European kingdom at one point or another, except mostly the Poles treated them probably the best. But they, in history, they were expelled by the King of England. They were confined to ghettos in Renaissance Italy. They were regularly told that they had to all leave from various places again and again and again and again. So it makes sense that from the perspective of a lot of Jews, it's like, okay, well, I'm not really welcome in France. I'm not really welcome in England. I'm not really welcome in Spain. I'm not really welcome anywhere. There has to be some place where I can live, where I can be a Jew. And the logical answer would seem to be this place that my ancestors came from. That makes sense. It really does. The problem is of course, the Romans had taken the Jewish population, mostly because the Jewish population had been so intransigent about living under Roman rule for a variety of reasons, and the Romans had basically uprooted massive portions of the population and spread them throughout Europe. In the meantime, other people had moved in, namely Arab Muslims. There were also some Christian groups that had, despite the fall of the Byzantine Empire, which had previously ruled over the area, they had managed to hang on under various Islamic empires, and they were still there as well. And this created a problem for a lot of Zionists because they said, why is someone living in the place that's, at least in terms of my philosophy, supposed to be mine? Just mine. This is the place that we're supposed to have. This is where we came from. This is the only place that's fit for Jews. We should have this. There was a lot of thinking about how to handle this. Most people wanted some sort of insular, homogenous community somewhere in this space that would be just Jewish. And the British largely agreed that they, after World War II and the Holocaust, that there should be something like that in Palestine. There have been other ideas, Argentina, Brazil, all sorts of other locations that various colonial powers just wanted to get rid of, honestly. For a while, Madagascar was a prime contender, which would have presented its own host of problems. But again, the consensus from the Jewish population was that really it had to be Palestine. Had to be somewhere in Palestine that would be a Jewish homeland. And the British largely agreed, but they understood that there was about to be an issue. Because the Zionists wanted something that they couldn't have, not without doing something bad. Well, what? Well, they needed to move the people who were already living there. And again, this being the British, they weren't entirely averse to the idea of, oh, well, we have to move some of our brown subjects. Oh, well. They weren't entirely against this idea, but it was the consequences that they were thinking of. They're like, if we move a few of them, maybe. If we move as many as they want, that's going to be a big problem. That's going to cause issues. That's going to cause issues throughout the entire region. If we do what they want us to do, we're not going to do that. And the response of several Zionist groups in Palestine was terrorism. The Stern Gang and the Haganah were two major organizations that used terror to try and convince the British to leave and convince Arab Muslims who were living in Palestine to leave. Now, I want to be clear. One of the things that's kind of, and I'm using the term Arab Muslim, that's not entirely accurate. The Palestinians are considered Semites. They are considered part of the Semitic region, just like Jews are considered Semites. Sarmatians are considered Semites. The Druze are considered Semites. Alawites are considered Semites. These are all Semitic peoples. The main issue was that, okay, well, I mean, if these were just your run-of-the-mill, Arabs, I could just move them over to Iraq or to Egypt or to any one of a number of places. But none of those places want them because they're not real Arabs. They're Semites. So now, the British are looking at it saying this is a problem. And we need to balance the needs of these two groups to prevent there from being a catastrophe. And the result is that the British especially become the targets of the Stern Gang and the Haganah. and it culminates in the brutal execution of 10 British soldiers in Jerusalem. After that, the British looked around. They said that we have a choice, right? Our choice is either we can be seen to be cracking down on Jews, which would look really bad considering what just happened, or we can leave and we can let these two sides hash it out. And they honestly, on some level, I think they honestly believed that they were going to hash it out somehow, because they looked at it and they said, surely the Jews, the Zionist Jews moving into Palestine won't go to the lengths that they could, right? They're not going to storm into villages and slaughter the populace. They're not going to, go house to house burning them. They're not going to do any of these things. And they left. And that's exactly what happened. In Palestinian history, this is called the Nakba. The Declaration of Independence of Israel resulted in the forced deportation of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians living in Palestine. And then you get the refugee camps on the edges of territory that Israel feels it can't claim, and that it doesn't have the ability, to do anything about these, millions of other people who have lived in the region before the Zionists showed up. And that now they're very angry, and a lot of them are fighting them. And of course, pardon me, other Arab states around them are fighting Israel as well. And they have their own reasons. Most of them are for internal domestic politics. Some of them are to shore up religious bona fides. Some are to just be bigots. There's a lot of reasons why a lot of different sides in the Israeli War of Independence fought against Israel. As was demonstrated, they were not terribly unified in that effort, and they were defeated. I say Israel still exists today. But it still left the problem of the Palestinians that the Israelis had expelled. And every successive war that happened, whether or not Palestinians were involved or not involved, it didn't matter. They were pushed into smaller and smaller and smaller enclaves. They were pushed out of their historic places where they had lived, in many cases, before monotheism, right? Before the entire region switched over to, the Abrahamic God. These people's ancestors had been living in that place that entire time. They'd gone through the whole, okay, well, now we have Jews over here, and they worship one God. Okay. Oh, now these Romans are now worshiping their God, but different and crucified. But yeah. Okay, and now this other guy says that he's actually the prophet of the same God. These people have been living there, and now they weren't. They were told they had to leave. Not swear allegiance to Israel. Not, hey, if you're a good citizen, if you work with us, we will include you in the Israeli state. No, that was not what happened. It was leave or die. Most of them left. But they couldn't go to their Arab neighbors because they were Semites. So they got stuck. They got stuck in two places principally, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And those became massive, collections of displaced peoples who had been living in places like Jerusalem, been living in places like Tel Aviv, been living in places like Haifa. But they couldn't live there anymore because the new Jewish state said, you are not a Jew, you cannot live here. Okay. I'll go, but where do I go? And this brings us to the problem, right? This brings us to the crux of why we keep on sticking here between this fight between Palestinians and Jews. Is no one wants the Palestinians, and the Jews seem very convinced that no one wants them either. So we have two groups whom no one wants, and they both want the same piece of land. Or they both want to at least exert control and dominance over the same piece of land. And neither of them are willing, the way it's portrayed right now is that neither of them are willing to share. It's either Israel dies or the Palestinians die, one or the other, locked in this cage match. Except that's not really the case, is it? Because we spent a good portion of the 90s and the 2000s trying to find a way to have peace in Israel. We tried to find a way to have Palestinians and Israelis coexist side by side. And there's been a lot of progress. There's been an immense amount of progress. For the first time, Palestinian members of the Jewish, the Israeli Knesset are able to join governments as elected members of the Israeli Knesset. And that's a new evolution. Before, every party would shun the idea of having Palestinians as part of their coalition. Completely think about it. Oh, we aren't an apartheid state. We aren't racist, but none of us want to talk to any of the elected members from the few Palestinians who have citizenship in our country. We don't want to talk to them. That sounds terribly progressive, doesn't it? In case you haven't noticed, that's a lot of sarcasm. So it has been some progress, but the main issue that has remained, or that has continued to grow, is the issue of where do we put a growing Jewish population in relation to at least a stable, if slightly growing Palestinian population. Again, we both want the same thing. Two groups can't go anywhere else. Both want land. And the problem is the Israelis signed these agreements that said we're going to stop trying to take Palestinian land for our own uses to build settlements for Jews only. And then they broke that agreement. And they keep breaking that agreement. They keep creating a situation in which Israeli governments are beholden to voters who are pushing these ultra-religious, ultra-right-wing settlements that abut or are in Palestinian communities. And in many cases, using violence, just like the Haganah and the Stern Gang, to force Palestinians off their own land. And then when Palestinians try and ask for protection or help, very often the Israeli state is not very forthcoming in protecting their land claims or protecting their right to life, liberty, and property. This is a big issue. Now, some people will point to issues like the Temple Mount and everything else. Those are flashpoints, mostly because that's kind of like the icing on the cake, right? You take my land, you bomb my community, you put your soldiers, and you make clear that I am not welcome in my own home, and then you tell me that I can't go to one of my religion's most holy sites and pray. Come on, guys. Really? You do all these terrible things to me. And now you're going to put on top of that, I can't go to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and pray. Because at one point, you believe this was the Temple Mount for, Judaism's most holy temple. And that may be the case. Obviously, a lot of groups viewed this site as holy. But I mean, it's not. People keep on wanting to boil this down to, oh, they're Muslim and they're Jewish. A lot of Palestinians couldn't care less. In fact, I mean, we're talking about a group that actively kind of eschewed religion as part of its branding for much of its history. They didn't want to be seen as just those other Muslims. They wanted people to understand we are not like, the Saudis. We are not like the, Syrians. We are not like these other people. We want a more secular style of life. And very often the Palestinian Liberation Organization under Arafat would go out kind of a little bit out of its way to not have big discussions on religion. And the part of it was is they didn't think that there was anything to be gained there. Like we're not going to get anything if we make this about religion, because no one's going to deal with any of it. We have to deal with this on political concerns. Now, the early PLO was not very good at this, and they did use terrorism. The PLO used terrorism, the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, and all sorts of other organizations that fought the Israelis at every turn to try and wrest control of the West Bank and Gaza Strip from the Israeli government and the Israeli armed forces. And to be clear what that meant, like why am I fighting to force the Israelis out of these places? Well, these places have only experienced in their history a very brief moment of not being essentially giant prisons. And that's going to be very important when coming up with understanding what's about to happen. These places have been giant prisons for most of their existence. If you're a Palestinian, you don't have a right to work in Israel. You have to go through essentially a visa process, even though you are in territory that Israel claims sovereignty over. Israel claims that the land that you live on, that you did not immigrate from someplace, you did not come from Jordan, you did not come from Egypt, you did not come from these places. The land that you were born on belongs to Israel, but you cannot be an Israeli. You cannot be a citizen of Israel. That doesn't make any damn sense. But okay, so I can't go work any place. I don't have a passport. I unless the Israelis who don't have any at the time, especially don't have any Palestinian members, they don't have to meet our demands about we need improved sewage systems, or we need money for schools, or we need a low-income building program, or we need food stamps, or any of the other things that Israel regularly provides the rest of the people who live within its sovereignty. Palestinians can't have that. But they live on land that Israel claims that they are sovereign over. They didn't move there. They just are there. A lot of that work in the 90s and early 2000s was to stop this indoor prison situation, to relax conditions on Palestinians, to make it so that where they were living wasn't a giant indoor prison, constantly being attacked by Israeli army acting as prison guards over people who have committed no crime other than simply existing. I mean, you put someone in a prison for committing a crime. You don't isolate and constantly exert domination tactics over a group of people unless you view them as civilized people, unless you view them as some sort of imminent threat. These people most of these people were not an imminent threat. They're just like, I was born here. That was enough for the Israeli government. Now, again, I'm not trying to say the Israeli government hasn't suffered horribly and that I'm not trying to excuse terrorism. But we need to understand that the terrorism is there's terrorism on both sides. This has been a war of terror by the Israeli government on the Palestinians and by the Palestinians on the Israeli civilians. So the Israeli government terrorizes Palestinian civilians. So the Palestinian civilians get angry and they terrorize Israeli civilians because civilians are easy targets. Military bases are have a lot of people with guns who will shoot at you. They are not considered good targets for that reason if you don't have a lot of guns and the ability to take and hold land. And which again is part of why Israel hasn't tried to re-invade or reassert control over the West Bank or Gaza Strip here in 20 years is because the Israelis can't hold it. And the reason they can't hold it is because there's no people living there who they consider Israelis, and those people can't go anyplace else. So they just have to stay there, and they're going to stay there, and they're going to have to either try and survive. And in the course of surviving, of course, the Israelis hope that they don't develop a significant hatred of the people who have made their lives harder, which in many cases is Hamas, but in many more cases is also the Israeli government. So we're going to hope that they don't develop some sort of hatred that's going to convince them that they'll join the militias and fight the Israelis. Or the other option is they die. Now, this leads us to what the Israelis have declared yesterday. They have declared an exclusion zone in the north of the Gaza Strip. And they have ordered all Palestinians who have nothing to do with Hamas that they must evacuate. Over 1 million people. And it's been noted not that many people are leaving. And the Israelis say, "Oh, this is proof that they're with Hamas." And the problem is everyone else who's looking in is saying, "Where do they go to?" If they leave their homes that you're bombing, right? Where do they go? Oh, we'll go to the southern part of the Gaza Strip. Is there housing there for us? Is there food? Water? Clothing? Education? Medicine? Is there anything that these people need to survive in abundance where they can just say, oh, 1 million people are going to move out of this part and move into this part? No. That doesn't exist. So why make the order? And I want to be clear, a lot of totalitarian governments have tried this game before. Colonial governments especially were good at it. We told them to leave, and they didn't leave. And so, sadly, we had to shoot them. This has been done a ton of times. A lot. Western nations have been especially good at this. We told them to leave. Where are they going to go to? I don't know. Doesn't matter as long as they aren't here. Where are they going to go to? You know they can't go anyplace. So you know what you're going to do. And in the Israeli mind, they're, we're going to go fight Hamas. We're going to go destroy Hamas. All they're going to do is make more Hamas. Because the people who survive will be that much more determined to make sure that they never live next to an Israeli armed force ever again. This is insanity. And everyone's rallying around Israel saying, oh, this is horrible. Yes, this is horrible. What Hamas did was horrible. What Hamas did was the only response that the Palestinians have yet managed to convey to the conservative and right-wing Israeli regimes that have succeeded Yitzhak Rabin and his attempt to try and forge peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Point of order, because lots of people forget that Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a right-wing Israeli for his troubles, not a Palestinian. And why was Yitzhak Rabin assassinated? Why have successive attempts to broker peace failed? Because we as Zionists must own the land, but someone else is already living there. So what? And this has resulted in atrocity after atrocity after atrocity after atrocity after atrocity. And it's been answered by atrocity after atrocity after atrocity after atrocity after atrocity. You don't have to be anti-Israeli to look at the situation and say, I condemn what Hamas has done. I also condemn the violence that Israel is about to unleash on the Gaza Strip. I condemn both. You're not anti-Israeli for saying that. There are a lot of Israelis who don't want this. There are a lot of Israelis who want some sort of end to the violence. The biggest issue that for Israelis every single time is security. The only problem is that the right wing keeps on telling them that their security comes from killing Palestinians. But the problem is they can't kill them fast enough. And groups like Hamas say their power comes from the exact same place. No one else will protect you. America won't protect you. Britain won't protect you. Egypt won't protect you. The Saudis won't protect you. No one will protect you from the Israelis except for us. They both are two sides of the same goddamn coin. They both operate in the exact same manner. Commit acts of terror, commit acts of violence, demonize and dehumanize your opponent. Tell them that the only way that they will ever be better off is by killing and killing and killing and killing some more. And not just the soldiers, the civilians, everyone. Because that's what the Israelis are about to do. Again, this is very clear. This whole tactic of evacuate, we can't. Oh, well, guess I just have to bring more bullets. Western Europe, we did a lot of this. The exact tactic. Israel's not going in there on a peacekeeping mission. I would argue, in truth, they're not even really going in on for the purpose of vengeance or justice or anything else. I mean, there are a lot of ways to exact that. The Israelis have proven in the past they don't have to, send a massive force across the border. They can kill the people responsible without having to involve, weeks or months of aerial bombardment. But you know what? Putting a bullet in someone's head in a back alley isn't as copacetic for the headlines, so that your people know that you're doing something for their security. Look at what I did. You see this neighborhood of Palestinians? I blew them all straight to hell. Blew them all straight to hell. Because I care about your security. There may have been some Hamas in that neighborhood. And that's why we blew it up. And, of course, the fact that dozens of Palestinians died in the process who probably had nothing to do with Hamas. Well, why were they there? Because they don't have any other place to go. Again, we just keep on going around in a circle at this point, but you get the point. What Israel is about to do is they are setting up a case for genocide. This has to stop. And I want to leave with this because, a lot of people are going to be like, well, David, you point to the problem, you point to what's going on. What's your solution? Here's my solution. Let's have a state of Israel. Let's have a state of Palestine. And let's have them be the same thing. Because the only way this ends is when both sides share the land. When both sides have one government. When Palestinians have civil rights in Israel and Israelis can be assured that there are major incentives for the Palestinians other than you won't kill me, for them to cooperate in some sort of confederal or federal state with Israelis, where Israeli settlements can't say this is Jews only, and Palestinian settlements can't say this is Palestinian only. When both sides have to share the land, when they have to be neighbors together, the fighting will end. Won't be all at once. It won't ever go away completely. But that's how you solve the problem. Stop with this nonsense of a two-state solution. Stop. I mean, that's been dead for 20 years. It's not going to work. There's never going to be a state of Palestine and a state of Israel. There was only Palestine. There was only Israel. There was only one country that fits there. And it has to belong to both. That's the only way we stop this. And we need to stop pretending otherwise. Let's hope I'm wrong. Let's hope the Israelis have restraint. As is our custom. Good night, good evening, and good luck.